Hello, five-star real estate agents, and welcome to another live stream episode of The Deal Doctors. I'm Eric Graham, actually streaming live from Seattle, Washington today in this great weather out here, 18-degree mile per hour, rainy. No, I'm actually in Ada, Michigan. I'd prefer to be in Seattle because it's not raining there, at least, if you can believe it. Anyway, we're going to be covering a couple different topics today that I wanted to review. One of them was condo associations and what listing agents should be looking for, as well as buyer's agents when you have a client looking to buy or sell a condominium. Topic 2 that I want to review briefly is based on deadlines. What happens when an agent doesn't extend a deadline, such as a closing date deadline? And then number 3, I want to update everyone on some new information that's come across our table here with regards to escalation clauses. So there's a lot of information here. Let's dive right in, and let's talk about what a condo association is. And it's really just a democratic institution that governs properties such as condos and apartments. Now, a condo association is responsible for mainly maintaining common areas and elements of a condo development. Now, by purchasing a condominium within an association, an owner basically acknowledges the mandatory membership to that association and agrees to abide by the covenants, codes, and restrictions, including paying a regular assessment fee to be able to live in that condo or apartment. And again, condo associations should not be confused with HOAs or homeowner associations. Those are consisting mainly of homes and normally have legal descriptions that are referenced with the name lot. So when you're pulling title work, you will know that something is a condominium because normally in the legal description it will reference a unit. So there will be a unit number. And for homes and HOAs, you'll typically will see lot number in the description. So why should a listing agent become familiar with a condo association prior to listing? And the main reason is that you want to be able to answer questions and make it look like you're an expert in what you're doing. I think too many times when we go to list a condo, we maybe find out information much later on during the process of listing instead of actually doing a lot of our due diligence up front. Now, what are some of those things that a listing agent may want to explore and find out? Well, there's quite a bit of information here. One of those is who's the managing condo development? Who is managing that condo development? Who's the principal officer, and what's their contact information? You have to understand that management company or that developer, you're going to need to get their information so that you can get all of the information that you need prior to listing a condo. Now, again, we do understand that we're in a hurry to try to get certain condos listed in time frame, but you definitely want to make sure that you do your due diligence as soon as possible, preferably before you list. So, a question here that always comes up during condos is, does the condo association have the right of first refusal? Now, what is a right of first refusal? We get plenty of calls from. And a right of first refusal, it's an agreement, and it allows a buyer and seller to enter into an arrangement by which the potential buyer is given the first crack at the property when it goes up for sale. The terms may stipulate a certain price, or they may be given the opportunity to match the offer of a third party who isn't part of that right of first refusal. So anytime you're selling a condo, you may want to have a conversation with the principal officer or the managing condo association to find out if there is a right of first refusal. Because if there is, what type of right is it? And then number 2, if you get an offer from someone, you may have to surrender that offer over to the condo association to see whether they want to move forward on their right of first refusal at the price and terms that were presented to your seller. So it can be a big deal. Number 2, we also want to obtain the condo association booklet if they have one. Typically it's a binder that basically spells out all the amenities that the condo association is offering, what their fees are, what those fees will actually provide to that seller or buyer. We also want to know what's the buy-in fee. A lot of associations have a certain buy-in fee based on the sales price. Normally we see around a 1%, but that's not normal. I mean, who knows? That's why it's important to ask that association management company who's overseeing that. And what are the monthly fees of the association? And what do those fees cover? Is it water? Is it heat? Is it garbage? Utilities? Cable? We don't know. So it's important to understand what those fees will cover. Does the condo offer a parking garage? Is it covered? Is it uncovered? Is that part of the property that's being sold, or is that an additional monthly fee or rent to be able to utilize that garage parking spot? It's also very important to understand what the condo bylaws are, how that company or how that association is structured, and what they are allowed and what they aren't allowed to do when it comes to selling or buying the condos. Another big thing that I think it gets overlooked are statements from the managing company. Typically, it's a statement of capital expenditures for scheduled future purchases for 2 years. Sometimes it's basically called a forecast budget. Sometimes buyers will like to see the forecast budget because we want to know in 2 years from now, are they putting a new roof on the property? Are they putting new windows into the condo association? And if so, what does that mean to the monthly association fee? Again, those are massive expenditures. So a monthly fee could go from $300 a month, all of a sudden doubling to $600. And sometimes buyers, it doesn't meet their budgets, and all of a sudden they get into this great condo. A year later, they find that their association fees, their monthly fees doubled, and now they're struggling financially. So it's always helpful to have that information if we can get it from them. We also want to know what the reserves are that a condo association holds. So again, that's going to be in their profit and loss, their P&L statements. What reserves, and it will actually say reserves on a line item there. You want to know how much extra money that the managers or the developer is holding. Reserves is simply for future improvements, and it's nice to know that there are reserves there because that's going to limit the monthly association fee that's going to be charged to you or to your client. You also want to find out if there's any pending lawsuits that can interfere with what your fees are going to be each month. If there are pending litigation, there's a possibility that those monthly fees may be increased in order to offset that payout if the condo is found at fault and they have to settle. Another important aspect could be the insurance company for the condo association. Sometimes we like to know who the insurance company is because as a buyer, I might like to call that current insurance company and ask if there's any pending claims. Again, if there aren't any claims or haven't been any claims, that's a good sign. If there are claims, it may mean that there's a potential risk for an increase in your association monthly dues. Again, one of the biggest things as well are any special assessments. Special assessments are always an issue for both listing and buyers because most special assessments have to be paid at closing. So if you're a seller, sometimes we may want to increase that price slightly to cover that expense of that special assessment. And if you're a buyer, you want to make sure that the seller is paying that special assessment if it can be paid off at closing. And again, people are always concerned about property taxes as well. But again, monthly fees, whether they're monthly, quarterly, or yearly, is something that should always be determined prior to listing or as a buyer. Now, we know that a lot of times when we go to list these condos that we just don't have the time to figure out all of our due diligence, but we highly encourage it because this information that you end up finding out, you need a lot of times for your MLS listing, such as buy-in and monthly fees. And I wouldn't take, sometimes the sellers aren't even sure what their monthly fees are, so it's always a good idea to pick up the phone and speak with management or the principal officer of the condo association and get this information so that you have true, accurate information that reflects what's going on with that condo. If not, it always leads to issues at the very end, at the 11th hour, when a buyer all of a sudden says, hey, I'm not closing, you guys didn't disclose this information to me. One of the most important things from a buying standpoint, if you're representing a client and they want to buy a condo, is that you can attach an addendum to that purchase agreement. It's a condominium addendum. It basically spells out that the buyer is going to have a certain amount of time to get certain information from the listing agent or the seller, and it's going to grant the buyer a specific amount of time to review those documents and either agree to them or disagree. I know that West Michigan Regional, the West Michigan Regional Purchase Agreement has a West Michigan Regional Condominium Addendum. It's kind of a two-pager. It's very lengthy. It's basically spelling out all of the information that we just talked about, and it's basically stating to the seller, hey, look, we want to make sure we get all this information, and we want time to be able to review this information. And it has to be to the buyer's complete satisfaction. If anything within that information isn't to the buyer's satisfaction, the buyer will have the right to terminate. So that's why it's very important to try to gather all this information as a listing agent. And the biggest person to go to is the condominium management or the principal officer of that condominium association. Again, if you're a buyer's agent, make sure that you attach the addendum to the purchase agreement when you submit an offer so that your client is protected. It'll be very helpful so that you don't have any surprises in the future. There's also, for listing agents, to get some type of a refresher or reminder of what you need. There's a 5-star condominium information sheet in Dotloop. This form basically just spells out information for a listing agent, what the dues are, how often dues are charged. So this is a good, kind of like a nice little checklist. Normally we would use a residential data form for houses, but here's one for condominiums, just to give you an idea of what services are being offered, what's the buy-in, any future special assessments. So it just kind of gives you a nice little referral checklist to make sure that you're answering all proper questions that you need to list a property. Okay, now I think I've covered that. Just wanted to mention that to everyone about condominiums. Topic number 2, I wanted to briefly discuss what your options are when it comes to extending a deadline for closing. We're seeing a lot of agents all of a sudden, the day before they're supposed to close, one or the other party will call up and say, hey, I'm not closing. I don't want to. We just had a case where someone called up and said, hey, look, I'm not paying for this home warranty. I'm the seller. I'm not closing unless you remove unless you take away my expense for that home warranty. Otherwise, I'm not closing. I was thinking about that on the way up here and what I'd say about that. It's not the great practice for a seller. It's called failure to perform. I was even thinking further that it could even be considered a quid pro quo, something for something, where if you don't remove this, if you don't remove my fee of paying the buyer this home warranty, I'm not closing. I think it's a very dangerous practice for any of our clients to try to change the terms at the very last hour. It does put them in liability, and I would have to imagine an attorney would have a heyday, would have a great time prosecuting a seller for that, not only for attorney fees, but for potential quid pro quo damages. It just does not look good for anyone if a client wants to try to change the terms at the 11th hour. And I think it's important for agents that we continue to talk to our clients, because there's a lot of nerves that go on towards closing. They're amped up, they're concerned, they're scared, they're nervous, and we just need to be able to calm them to say, look, this is what we agreed to, we need to move forward. It's the right thing to do. So we'll see. Anyway, I wish everyone continued success trying to navigate those waters, because I know they're difficult, but you can always reach out to the deal doctors here, and we can try to help guide you on what next steps that your client may have to pursue. What we're seeing is a lot of times we just have to get an attorney involved to write a very straightforward, nasty letter to compel them to move forward. Then once they start seeing on this document the tens of thousands of dollars of potential liability that they might have, they tend to change their tune, but it's kind of a last resort. All right, I also want to jump into escalation clauses. We're seeing still a lot of confusion with agents on how to understand an escalation clause. And here's my simple answer to you. You can't. Yes, I know. Terrible. So, what does that mean, you can't? Well, escalation clauses, first off, are written so differently between one purchase agreement and another purchase agreement. And truly, the only way to understand how to compare escalation clauses is if they are written the same. Meaning, are we comparing an apple to an apple, or are we comparing an apple to an orange? For example, you might get an offer that has an escalation clause that excludes homes that are contingent upon the sale. You may have an escalation clause that doesn't have a maximum capped value. You may have another escalation clause that does have a maximum capped sales price top out line. You may have an escalation clause that states that yes, this offer it will be escalated only one time based on the sales price that's being offered. You may have an escalation clause that says that the escalated price can escalate multiple times. So how do we know? And this is where I want to spend some time with how best to navigate escalation clauses, because it can be very difficult. I do want to state right off the bat that as far as I know, and from what I'm hearing from attorneys, is that escalation clauses have not been reviewed or solidified in the courts, meaning that they're still open for interpretation, and I believe they're very dangerous language that can be used because it's left up to interpretation based on one escalation clause being compared to another. So I'm hoping that after this, I'm also going to send out an updated Michigan Realtors escalation clause information packet that this finally puts an end to how we deal with escalation clauses. And it's important because right now escalation clauses are left up to interpretation. So we're going to dive right in and try to resolve the myth on escalation clauses. And drafting an escalation clause, I know that Don and I had worked in the past and we drafted escalation clauses, and I thought we did a pretty good job of that. But we're still seeing that there are levels of interpretation. And the biggest one is, does our escalation language only allow an escalation clause to be triggered once, or can it be triggered multiple times? And the answer is we don't know. We don't have the answer. They haven't been challenged in the courts yet. So the trick to drafting an escalation clause is that you want to put the offer on a level playing field with potential other offers. But like we've said, it's hard to do because we don't know what language some of these other escalating clauses are being used. So ideally, an escalation clause should only be triggered by a generally better offer. So if you have an offer of $350,000 and you have another offer of $360,000 or $351,000 or whatever, a better offer, it should trigger the escalation clause. Now, a lot of our escalation clauses are, we end up removing any of the seller paid closing cost or concessions, and they're bona fide offers. A bona fide offer means that we have proof that the person can purchase the home. Another issue that we run into is, does the home still have to go under contract? So here's offer A that says, hey, here's an escalation clause, but it's contingent upon the buyer still getting their home under contract. You have offer B that is already pending. Are these the same? No, they're not. So we need to be careful, and we need to understand whether one of those escalation clauses is written the same as the other. And if not, we're not comparing the same apple to apple. So the biggest question is, and I want to try to make sure that we understand this, is how the escalation will work once it's triggered. And I know in the past we've always said that if the seller notifies the buyer in writing of the new price as calculated per the escalation clause, is that an acceptance? Or when we used to teach agents, escalation clause triggered, sales price to be blank dollars. If we do that, and that's how we've trained agents to accept the offer, escalation clause accepted at, or sales price to be blank, we've always taught that that's an accepted offer. But we don't know if it is. And the problem that we're running into right now with attorneys is that an accepted offer or is it a counter offer? In other words, is the buyer already contractually bound to pay the escalated purchase price? Or is the buyer not contractually bound unless the buyer signs an addendum? So that's our dilemma. So we sit here and go, great, thanks Eric. I thought I had escalation clauses, and now you just screwed it up, and now I don't know how I need to figure this out. I thought you told me I should just check the box, accepted as is, sales price to be blank, done deal, let's move on. Well, what happens if the buyer doesn't agree with your escalated calculation? See, so we're running into a problem. So what we're going to say is this, that at the end of this, I'm going to be sending out an updated escalation addendum. It's known as Exhibit A, and it can be referenced in the future. It should be attached to any purchase agreements by buyers agents. And it spells out very similar language that Don and I had already put together in the past. I think it's almost identical. I think because when we wrote it, we had Gail Anderson, one of the attorneys, finalize it once we put it together, and she said, yeah, I like it, and let's move forward. So this addendum clearly spells out what the purchase agreement date is, what the property location is. It says, in the event that seller receives a bona fide offer to purchase the above property at a price higher than the price contained in buyer's offer, then buyer will escalate the purchase price and pay blank dollars above such bona fide offer, less any and all seller paid closing costs or concessions. So again, they're removing any seller paid closing costs or concessions. It doesn't address, potentially up in this language, whether a home has to still get under contract. So keep that in mind. It says here, if this escalation provision is invoked, seller agrees to notify buyer in writing as to the escalated purchase price amount, which notice shall include a copy of the competing bona fide offer. So again, if we trigger the clause, we still need to give a copy of it. But down below, we're now showing here calculation of escalation clause. So as a buyer, when you fill this out and submit it over as an offer to the listing agent, you're telling them how you're going to calculate the escalated price. In one option, and again, you can check all that apply to you, it says a cap on escalated purchase price. It says the total escalated purchase price shall not exceed blank dollars. So you're giving the seller, you're showing your hand to the seller of what your maximum cap rate is for your escalation clause. Now, I would think that any good savvy seller these days would probably just turn around and counter you for your maximum capped value if they didn't want to deal with any escalation clauses. And Don and I are starting to tell agents that. I think we're kind of tired of the ambiguity in language of the escalation clause, and we're now stating, why not just counteroffer someone at their maximum price and let's see if they hit it. Or maybe we don't want to be greedy. Maybe it's a couple of grand less than the max price because it's a solid offer, it's a solid lender, it's a good down payment. So that is an option. We're starting to see more and more of just the counter offer coming back to solidify the price. Another option in here under the calculation of escalated price under B, it says exclusion of contingent offers. So if you were to check this box, it means that, hey seller, I want you to compare all escalation clause, but I want you to exclude any offers that are contingent. So it says here a bona fide offer. So it goes back to paragraph 1 and defines what a bona fide offer is. And in this case, a bona fide offer for purposes of paragraph 1 above shall not include any offer that is contingent upon the sale of the buyer's home. So this is a great language because we're basically excluding other escalation clauses. So if there's another offer out there that is contingent, that they still have to get their home under pending status, we can't compare that. We're not going to be able to compare that. That seller will not be able to compare that offer. So if you were to get an offer back saying accepted, and all of a sudden you saw that they were using an offer to trigger your escalation clause to go up, and it was contingent upon the sale of the buyer's home, then it's not a true escalation. And then you could go back to them and say, no, what's your next offer? And most likely the sale price would be lower. There's also letter C here. It says exclusion of other escalation offers. It further defines what a bona fide offer is. A bona fide offer for purposes of paragraph 1 shall not include any offer containing an escalation clause. If this provision is not selected, a competing offer with an escalation clause may result in multiple escalations that escalate to the buyer's cap. So here, we're basically excluding other escalation offers. This is kind of dangerous language because this is finally determining that, hey, our escalation clause can bounce back and forth, all the way up to the max capped rate. And then number D, appraisal contingency. This is always great for buyers because it says that the buyer's obligation to purchase the property at the escalated purchase price is contingent upon the home appraising. So if the home doesn't appraise, well, then you're going to have to go back to the drawing board and negotiate that appraised sales price. Doesn't mean that the seller has to agree to it. The seller could say, no, you said that this was your price, that you're going to need to bring extra money. The buyer could say, no, well, I have an appraisal contingency that protects my buyer. They're only willing to pay the appraised value. The deal ends up blowing up because both parties can't agree, and that's just the way it is, and we put it back on the market. So anyway, there is a lot of information in here. The great thing about this addendum is it now gives a seller's response. It says attached to this addendum is a copy of the offer, and then it actually gives a place for the seller to either accept the offer or counter offer. So we're just getting into this a lot deeper, and I encourage all of you to take a look at this and read it. Let us know if you have any questions or concerns about this. But there is a lot of information in here, and we are trying to better provide guidance to both a buyer and seller so that they both can truly understand how they got to the final escalation price. Again, when in doubt, and if you're tired of escalation clauses, you can always just do a simple counter offer saying sales price to be blank dollars and see whether that buyer still wants to buy. Again, you're the negotiation expert as the real estate agent, and we encourage you to continue to negotiate your best for your client and do all that you can. I don't know if there were any questions on this, but I want to thank everyone for your time today. Continue to keep up good work, keep going, keep driving. The end of the year will be here very soon. And again, remember, we have a Christmas event coming up December 3rd at the Grand Rapids Art Museum from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. We hope to see you all there. And again, have a safe Halloween that's coming up as well. Take care.